their own vehicles rather than being able to depend on the police, I think is a watershed mark for South Africa and one of the greatest shames that we will ever live through as a nation.
And as a community, I think for us, a big impact was the Sword of Jerusalem. I mean, I underplay it, but I call it skirmishes. I mean, the 4,000 rockets that were rained down on on Israel had a huge impact on us in terms of a rise in anti-Semitism. I mean, for me, there's no doubt that it had a very big, there was a switch that I don't think has been switched off.
No, I think we've only seen it continue. I mean, I think if you look at the last few days and actually the edition that you right now, and you've just put to bed the Hanukkah edition, which is the third last edition for the year. I mean, the story of LEK. So
yeah, and how the story of LEK is by the Israel haters being turned into something that is pure fake news is astonishing. Is absolutely astonishing. I mean, this story really hit home for, I think, every single South African Jew.
Yeah, I mean, he was literally a tour guide on the way to work.
Yeah, exactly.
Not what has been made out by the media, by the as you
said. Didn't you hear the little warped characters? He was a colonial settler.
Yeah, a settler on one. He was a soldier.
Killed the terrorist. I love that twist on it. It's very inventive, actually. They should get prizes for creative writing.
I still cannot quite understand how our community has not against Africa for Palestine, who've led the charge for Miss South Africa to not go to Israel, an organization that was booted out of BDS internationally for their sexual molestation of women and for their cover-up in their failure to investigate properly. And that's the organization that has been bullying and beating Miss South Africa. How our community allows people like that to appear on television, to have meetings with ministers, to go around is actually disgraceful. Here you have an abusive organization that has been responsible for the abuse of women, abusing yet another woman. Yes. And women won't stand for it. No one should stand for it.
So do you know that there was, I think it was last week or the week before, it is in Nicola's story, there was an international gaming championship in Israel, and there were South African contenders. Nobody bothered to try and shame them or try and bully them, but they wait for a young 24-year-old beauty queen to bully.
And I mean, not
gender-based violence is one of the great policies of the ANC and our government and of the BDS. They're specialists in gender-based violence.
Yeah.
And there are people being put back in as mayors of towns in this country who have been convicted of child rape, and they are put into positions of power, running entire areas, and that's acceptable. But no outcome.
But I think that's the other big story of the year, is how local government has changed. The events just of the last few days, I think, are seismic. And perhaps, without getting too caught up in the negative, I think there's a lot of positives in where politics and government is going in the next few years. Better, we're going to have a lot to write about. They're going to be fantastic.
Absolutely. And I must say, having listened to Mpho Palazzi this morning on the radio, I was totally enchanted, and may she only do what she's planning to do, because my experience of her up until now is somebody who is a real doer and somebody who stands up for her principles. So let's hope that she can carry out what she plans for Johannesburg.
Guys, I'm just going to swap my camera around, and I'm going to walk you over to an elephant that's standing.
Who said we don't bring live, exciting television? In fact, you can hear local sightings. Where's Nada?
I'm going to find your neighbors to try shine the light again at the elephant. I don't know if you can see me standing literally 5 meters away from me there.
No. How are you used to Brink?
Sorry, what is that?
I was going to say you produced a remarkable Achievers production, but this one is a bit dark.
Yeah. Thank you, Bernard, for my hairstyle.
But you can see them. Our next door neighbors are shining a torch at the elephant.
Beautiful.
I can't see it. I'm sorry. I want to say that there. Oh, wow.
We've taken our webinars to a new level.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've done a few of these from game reserves around South Africa. We've done.
No, but this is live, Howard. This is you literally field reporting.
I don't know if we've gone live yet on YouTube and on Facebook. It would be to try to find out if that's actually gone live. But Sean, you're talking about Jewish Achiever Awards, and now we're up to about 38,000 people who've watched the awards so far, and they are available on the South African Jewish Report webinar channel. And it's been amazing. The response has been incredible. And tonight's video is, in fact, the recording from the breakfast, because before we have the actual awards on the Friday before, we have a breakfast, which is a closed event for nominees and winners and a few other people, VIPs. And there were some amazing speakers this year, and we wanted to make sure that people actually get access to that and can actually see Absa's Chief Economist, Jeff Gable, who has an amazing story to tell, as well as GG Alcock, who tells the other side of the story. The one's quite depressing and the one's actually quite inspiring.
Listen, Jeff always says he's not there to depress, and he's always realistic, but never too negative. He's always got a little uptick on his presentation, which I think everyone will definitely love. And as you say, you're right. It was too good not to share with everyone. And not only that, but as you say, GG Alcock he's literally the white Zulu, as they call him. And we gave his book, which was the KasiNomic Revolution. It's actually fascinating. So his whole talk is actually fascinating.
So, Dina, is it also Benji Porter's birthday today?
It is indeed. It would be remiss of us not to wish our board member and web hoster and multiple tasks that he actually does for us a massive, massive happy birthday. Sean, are you going to sing for us for Benji to wish him a happy birthday today?
No, I wouldn't want to spoil the celebration. So.
So Howard,
happy birthday, Benji.
Benji, we hope you have the best year, only of blessings, of health, of happiness, because you give so much to everyone. I mean, literally, when we talk about a community worker, Benji is that person. He gives of himself completely. I don't know when he finds time, because he does have 6 children and a full-time job, and is basically volunteering in a zillion organizations. So we only wish him literally the best year ever. And I mean, look, we're even showing him live elephants.
I think Howie's actually going to have the elephants sing happy birthday to him. I think so.
I'm a man of limited talent, and I hope the elephant has better talent than me.
He doesn't look very bothered by you, I have to tell you, Howie.
Yeah, I suppose so. But Dina, it looks like the time has just gone 8 o'clock, which probably means that you should start your webinar. And with that, I'm going to log off. Good night. See you all back in Joburg.
We were giving you a bit of leniency because you were in the bush, and this is probably our last webinar of the year. We were trying to get to 130, but we think 129 is adequate for the period.
But Dina, you had something up your sleeve for New Year's Eve, but let's see what happens.
I do, but then I realized that New Year's Eve is a Friday night, because I thought we could provide some musical entertainment, which I thought would be quite a brilliant. But maybe we'll do it for Christmas Eve. I mean, maybe it's a great idea. So I do have something up my sleeve. We'll discuss it, and we'll see how we can literally play it out.
Cool.
Good.
How we have the best time ever. Sean, also thank you guys for everything that you do, the amount of work. People again were asking you to get another award this year, but we can't give you an award every year. So we do appreciate all the work.
This is your award at
and
time in the bush.
Exactly. I hope you actually relax in the bush, because we know he has a problem switching off. So in the bush, you'd have limited choice, which is fantastic. So I hope he sees a lot of elephants. And Sean, you as well. I mean, you also literally run a bazillion things in a day.
Absolutely.
So Dina, thank you for everything you've done, and Petter, thank you for producing a remarkable paper week in, week out.
Thank you.
Enjoy the...
You too. And enjoy the newspaper. It's out.
Exactly. So the latest edition is out. So if anyone, as we know, today is Thursday. Wednesday. Petter has been working non-stop to get out this bumper edition. How many pages is it, Petter?
30 pages of our Hanukkah edition. And there's lots to read. There really is.
All right. And obviously a lot around the story about Ellie.
Yes.
Okay, and a lot of opinion, because there's a lot of that people need to know about it, and the truth of the story, because it has been so distorted by media locally and internationally that it's actually very scary thing when we talk about fake news, what has actually been shared and shared. So read the Jewish Report this week. Go and fetch it from any of your news outlets, your exclusive books, your Pick and Pays, your Spars, your Kosher World. Please go get your copy, or you can always go and download it offline, so online. So sajr.co.za. Please go and do it. And also, everyone, please, if you want, type in the chat right now where you are watching from. We know that this is talking about the economy. We, as Howard mentioned, we are going to be screening what we show for the Jewish Achiever Breakfast. So the Absa Jewish Achiever Breakfast every year, as we have for our nominees and finalists and VIPs, but we thought it was too good not to share. So we have got Jeff Gable, who's always outstanding. He's been the chief economist at Absa for absolute zillions of years. And I know Petter, I mean, every time we listen to him, I think he just gets better and better.
So can I say, I was surprised this year, because usually I get very depressed when I watch him or listen to him. And this year, actually, I found him quite inspiring. Maybe there was something wrong with me, but, you know, our viewers can see for themselves. Wow, there's people from all over, from Washington, Atlanta, Portugal,
Israel, UK, Harare,
Toronto,
Durban.
Wow.
Port Elizabeth. Guys, you know what? We love our international community, because I think that's what drives us. That's what gives us our growth. It's been a long year, but there's been a lot going on. And I think we are just so grateful for everyone who watches. And we hope that you gain a lot from all the webinars. As you say, so Jeff Gable, as you say, is even inspiring. Even you were excited by his speak. Yeah. And I think with GG giving us the KasiNomic Revolution, I think his insights are so unique that people are going to be very surprised, because people think they know what's going on in South Africa, but they don't. So when you listen to him speak, you will be blown away. So that is going to be
nice. It would be very nice for people to let us know what they think on the chat as they're watching. It would be great.
Absolutely. So please, everyone, put in your comments. We've got Sea Point, we've got Vancouver, Canada. We literally do have the entire world. Rochelle in Durban. So, it's wonderful to have all of you. And again, 129 webinars, Petter. It's exhausting.
Absolutely amazing. Amazing. Amazing.
All right. So we hope we're going to go and we're going to roll the actual presentation by Jeff and by GG. But Petter, just also, like, I mean, this whole thing started from the Jewish Report newspaper, which is the newspaper for which you are the editor. You have literally transformed the paper. The content that you create, the quality of it is just so phenomenal. And we just have to say a massive thank you. I don't know if people know how much work goes in every single week on that Wednesday when it is a rush to get it to the printers. You are full steam ahead, and you just have done a brilliant job.
Thank you, Dean. I must say that it is a labor of love, and I have a team second to none. I have the best editorial and the best production and editorial team in the world. I think I am blessed, because we all love this newspaper, and everything that happens that goes into putting it together is a labor of love.
Absolutely. And we can tell. So thank you so much for all the work you do, and to your entire team, to the entire Jewish Report staff, to the volunteers, to the people who are actually paid to be there every month, but actually give much more. So thank you to everyone, to Britt on controls tonight. Thank you, Britt, for also always being there, for Danny for helping as well, and just really a remarkable team effort. So I think without further ado, Petter, unless you want to add anything else, I think
I'm good.
to let it roll. Again, people, please put in your comments. Feel free to share, because I think what you're going to get tonight is a lot of information, really enlightening and really insightful. So thank you again. And if we don't speak to you afterwards, which I don't think we're going to, wishing everyone a wonderful, happy, healthy holiday. May you all go safely. May you be safe. If you haven't been vaccinated, please get vaccinated.
Be healthy.
Be well, go well, enjoy your holiday. It's been a long year. Everyone needs a good break, but be safe. So thank you to everyone, and we hope that you enjoy the presentations.
Britt?
That is your cue. Thank you so much.
I was sat down in this room a few days ago when we were doing some testing. Noms and I were having a discussion how excited people would be for an economics presentation. I thought, what a curious, that cannot possibly be true. And then I realized it's a little bit Pavlovian. People associate the economics presentation with being one step closer to the awards ceremony. So it's not the economics itself, it's the awards. I've got about 20 minutes, a little more than 20 minutes here to talk you through some of the things that I think are most relevant for the outlook where we are as South Africa today and going forward. So let me share a few slides in that space. The first thing, of course, we need to talk a little bit about COVID. It's the reason why we're not able to speak together face to face today. And on that side, I thought I'd just share a little bit about the global environment we're in on that side, and then follow up with some South African thoughts as well. So global new daily cases, you can see very much wave 1, wave 2, wave 3. You'll also note in this graph that the troughs here are sort of not coming down nearly as low as we were before. Rich world doing a better job in fighting COVID, but really the incidence, Southeast Asia, Latin America, very much rising here in Africa as well. So there's still plenty to be concerned about. Looking in the experience of the rich world countries, I think gives us a story or some information that's really relevant for us in South Africa as we think through our experience of the next few months. In the middle graphic here, you're taking a look at the United States and India, and there you can see in both cases, COVID very much under better control now than before. India, an interesting case, because while they've had a huge vaccination program, it's also the case an awful lot of the population there remains unjabbed. And the US is a story that I think many people follow quite closely with regard to the anti-vax movement and others. But the graphic on the right is maybe the most interesting. It's the very different experiences of the French and the English, France and the UK. In France, very clear 3 waves, very low incidence right now of COVID, but still a fair number of restrictions on the population. In the UK, some days now are very near the highs reached earlier in the pandemic. And I can say from personal experience, I was in the UK a couple of weeks ago for just one night, and no one needs to be standing too near me now as I mentioned that, but there's very little mask wearing. There's very little social distancing. It almost felt like the British were in a competition to see just how many people could contract COVID that week. They're able to do that in part because of very high vaccination rates. So lots of people finding themselves with COVID, but hospitals themselves not under much strain. And that may well be an appropriate lesson for the rest of us. Turning to South Africa, the fabulous news is that as we've exited our 3rd wave, as we've eased social restrictions, the number of new daily cases now is the lowest it's been really since the outset of the pandemic. That's fabulous news. Does it mean that we're 3 waves and done, that we can go from level 1 to level 0? I suspect that the lessons from elsewhere in the world suggest probably not. And the critical part of that lesson is really around vaccination. So in the UK, several months ago, they were already at the point where people with active antibodies, largely through vaccination, for some people through infection, was well over 90% of the population. Here in South Africa, if we think about our best data set, and our best data set is around the vaccination statistics itself, we have only about 30% of the adult population that's fully vaccinated today. We've got a little more than half the population that's had at least 1 jab, but we still have an awful long way to go. Perhaps more worrying, the graphic on the right is taking a look at just how many people are getting vaccinated each and every day. So fabulous news, after a long wait, we managed to get daily peaks closer to 300,000 than to 200,000 per day. But we're currently sitting at only about 150,000 jabs per day. It's not because there's a lack of vaccines. It's not because there's a lack of places to go and get inoculated. It's because we're coming up against this barrier of people who don't want. And with statistics for the country where overall vaccination is as low as it is right now, it means that the fourth wave certainly seems like a very real possibility for us. And with that, further restrictions on economic activity. Now, turning to the economics, sometimes in my field, we suffer a little bit because the data is always lagged. Data in front of you right now is looking at sort of different sectors in the economy and comparing where they were at the end of the second quarter. Now, we're already thinking about end-year holidays right now, but the end of the second quarter as compared pre-COVID. And unlike other sort of economic cycles that we see in South Africa and other countries, what's really pronounced here is just how big the variation is between different parts of the economy. Now, things will have progressed since the data that you see in front of you. We're going to talk about that in the next slide or two, but you can see that places like restaurants and hotels, more active today than before, but certainly still really under significant strain. At the other end of the spectrum, and reflected perhaps by why or how we're meeting today virtually for the second year in a row rather than in person, the telecoms environment's done pretty well. Food and beverages, maybe not sit down in restaurants, but being delivered to homes or buying in supermarkets, quite strong as well. So big divergence across the economy, and lots of people, including myself and my team, really trying to understand what parts of this will become part of the new norm going forward, and what parts of this are really just the COVID interruption, and whether it be a quarter from now or a year from now or 2 or 3 years from now, what goes back to the way we were pre-2020. Now, some of the better data that we have that tells us about where we are today in the economy, rather than looking in the rearview mirror to a quarter or 2 quarters ago, is the Google mobility data set. And that's sort of the big brotherish aspect of Google tracking all of our devices as we go about our daily business. Google knowing where shops and restaurants are, knowing where workplaces are, knowing where transit hubs are, and working out that if you're in the same place 7 days a week, from evening until early morning, probably working out where you live as well. In this space, we can see first the big dip that we had as we went into level 5 lockdown in sort of April of last year. And then you see this easing of restrictions. So the zero line in this graph says that there's the same amount of mobility, people moving around, as was the case in January and February 2020. So that last data just before COVID. And so you can see each of the waves here as we ease up restrictions, then lock down, ease up restrictions, and then lock down. So the great news is, according to the Google mobility data, if you look at sort of different types of retail, so I've excluded here supermarkets and pharmacies because they went back to sort of previous levels of business pretty quickly. It's necessity stuff. But other retail footfall there is actually looking quite positive. And in the data, a little bit stronger now than was the case pre-COVID. But of course, different stores are going to see very different outcomes in that space. Workplaces suggest that most people are back to work at least most of the time. And the transit hubs, of your experience during the school run in the morning or trying to get away for the weekend, etc., is that the traffic looks a little bit like it used to. The data suggests that your experience is not unusual. The traffic does look a little bit like it used to. So there is sort of significant normal returning here in our space. Now, there's 2 broad things that we've learned about the South African economy, I think, since the last time we were able to sit down together and speak. And the first one is that probably the South African economy is more resilient than we had feared, certainly as an economist. It's a little bit of a confusing graph in front of you right now. The dotted red line is pre-COVID, how we thought the economy would grow. The dotted orange line is what our fears were around the middle of last year, when we were really trying to think about the damage done by COVID and the lockdown first and foremost. But we also thought it would take a very long time for the economy to recover. It wasn't that we assumed Eskom was going to continue to fall over. It wasn't that we assumed that we were going to have second, third, fourth, who knows how many waves. It was just a reflection that shutting down businesses and interrupting the normal course of their days might be very difficult to restart. The solid line here is actually the path for the economy that we forecast today. So one thing to take from this might be, gosh, these guys aren't very good forecasters because there's a huge variation here. But the message that I want to leave you with is that though the initial damage from COVID was larger than we had anticipated, the resilience in the economy is in fact much larger. And so while different sectors will have different experiences, the overall size of the South African economy, we think we'll get back to where we were pre-COVID, not in 2023 or 24, which had been our earlier projection. We think we'll get there in the first half of next year. So that's very good news. The second bit of good news is that when Statistics South Africa released the new GDP release recently, they also took the opportunity, as they do every 5 years or so, to update their methodology, to adopt sort of best practice globally. And one of the outcomes from that is it turns out the economy is just larger than we had anticipated, all right? And about 10 or 11% larger. It doesn't mean suddenly there's 10 or 11% more jobs. It doesn't mean that when you go and look at your business statement, suddenly your business was 10 or 11% larger than you had anticipated. I don't want to overstate this too much, but it does indicate that the progression for ourselves as an economy has been a little bit stronger than before. We see that the agriculture sector is about 20 billion rand bigger than we had previously been measuring. The manufacturing sector, we're so accustomed to hearing very challenging stories around manufacturing. When we measure it better, it's about 75 billion rand bigger than it was before. So two of these positive stories. The economy looks more resilient than we had feared. The economy is bigger than we had known about before. That said, there are still some pretty chunky challenges, right? So on a headline basis, we've seen an awful lot of jobs disappear in South Africa. We know that on the front page of the newspaper, when the quarterly data comes out, it talks about an unemployment rate that's sort of 30% plus. And we talk about within that sort of discouraged workers. We talk about enormous numbers of young people who aren't being aren't given the opportunity to put their skills to use. And we certainly see that in the data. So for each of the age groupings here, the first age grouping is 25 to 34. For each of the age groupings, the first of the bars is sort of the middle of the last decade. It's a bit arbitrary, 2015. The second of the bars for each age grouping is just before COVID. And the third bar is the most recent data. And this is looking at what proportion of people in that age group have any labor income at all. And so the first thing that's really striking here is that for our youngest adults in South Africa, 25 to 34, the number was terrible even in the middle of the last decade. Barely half of all 25 to 34-year-olds had any labor income at all. We've gone from terrible to diabolical, lost more than 10 percentage points in that space. You'll see across all age categories, jobs have been lost. But what's interesting is as people grow older, the level of employment generally higher, more people working. The deterioration of that employment as a consequence of COVID, generally less. And that might tell a story about skills, right? As we move through our careers, we have more opportunity, we learn more, in some sense we're more valuable. And there's lots of evidence here to suggest that in this economic downturn, right, it's been people in the early parts of their careers that have been let go first. And there's a very specific strain there. We see it in another data set where we take a look at using international definitions of what are low and medium skilled jobs. It's the yellow lines in this second graph. And we compare it to, on an international definition, what high skilled jobs look like. And here we're just looking at the total number of jobs. So before COVID, low and middle skilled jobs, there were just under 12 and 2/3 million. 12.6 million jobs. COVID hits us, 2 million of those jobs vanish. More than a year later, some have come back, but we're still about 1.5 million jobs down on where we were before. Think about the pressure on those individuals. Think about the pressures on those families and those extended families. That's the strain that we're seeing as an economy. But look how different the experience is amongst the skilled workforce. Now, first, there's a very different number. Starting point for skilled workers is 3.75 million in South Africa. versus nearly 13 million in low and mid-skilled. But look at the difference in the experience over COVID. Barely any changed for the skilled workforce in South Africa. And it speaks about some of the inequality and challenges that we have as a country, right? Where those that are closer to sort of the strain level, when the economy turns down, they get thumped harder. And so if we think about this, the local elections through the lens of the different experiences of South Africans here, if we think about the strain and others, that's very much reflected in the labor market. And so when we think about as the economy recovers, it's not so much an economic recovery that's going to be necessary for skilled workers in the high end of the economy, but very much around getting sort of low and middle, younger and people in the middle parts of their career back to work. And what we see globally, and I suspect we'll see here in South Africa, is that's really tricky to do. The next point that I want to make that suggests another sort of broad challenge for us is just around interest rates. So I would imagine that, well, I hope that some people listening this morning are savers. I never really find too many people like that, but I know as a bank we have some savers. So the great news for savers is that financial markets think that interest rates are going to be rising. As economists, we think that interest rates are going to be rising. For everyone who is not so much a saver, but has a bond out there, who has a car payment out there, has credit cards or other debt, of course, the news that interest rates might soon be rising is not great news at all. And there's this huge disconnect right now between what financial markets are pricing, the bars in the graph on your left, saying that over the next year and a bit, the prime rate might rise by 2 or 2.5 percentage points, versus economists that believe that interest rates will rise, but not 2.5 percentage points, but maybe 0.5 or 0.75 of 1 percentage point. But the direction is clear for both. The money that you owe for things that you've bought already, well, the monthly payments are likely to be more challenging going forward. And what that means in a practical way is if some of the support that we've seen to the economy, new vehicle sales, used vehicle sales, really robust over the last year or two, house prices and house sales in many parts of the country, really robust despite the big job challenge for parts of the country. Well, a lot of this has been as a result, I think, of very low interest rates. And so those interest rates start to rise again. Some of that impetus, some of the benefit that we've had in this environment may well start to diminish. Then the last of my broad points is really just around what South Africa will look like going forward. Because of course, as we ease social distancing restrictions, as we manage to vaccinate, as the world economy gets further through the COVID recovery, then we need to start thinking about the medium and longer term issues in South Africa. Before COVID, our concern was that the country wasn't growing fast enough, it wasn't generating enough jobs, inequality was very large and rising, and the way out of that seemed to be some version of having the country grow quicker. Well, the only way countries grow more quickly is countries need to invest. We focus a lot in South Africa about government investment, about the state-owned enterprises, we think about renewable projects and others. But it's really the private sector that generates the vast majority of jobs and opportunities. And so it won't surprise you to know that when I think about medium and long-term investment in South Africa, I look to business confidence. A business that is confident today will be more likely to make an investment plan that may cost it money for the next 5 or 10. In the mining sector, it might be 20 or 30 years before it recoups its investments. Those businesses that are more confident and make those investments generate the jobs that we need and the extra growth that goes to boost the economy that much further. The graphic that's in front of you right now, the lighter colored bars are looking at business confidence. And we're going back here better part of 2 decades. Bars that are up means that on balance, business is more confident than not. But you see since 2008, there's been an unbroken stream of bars that are pointing down. That's on average businesses saying, I'm not at all confident about where things are. And the result of that, and we see it in the line is looking at investment from the private sector as proportion of GDP. Peaked around the World Cup, a year or 2 before that, but is much, much lower. And again, if you don't have investment, that's not, you're not building the new factory, right? You're not putting in place the new offices. You're not bringing into the labor force the new workers in that space. You're not creating that economic opportunity. Now, it's all well and good to say business must invest more, but in my narrative, until business feels more confident about the coming years, that investment isn't going to take place. If it doesn't take place, we get this first bounce post-COVID as we go a little bit back to normal. But we must remember our pre-COVID normal wasn't very comfortable. And so there's very real challenges here. Closing thoughts and implications of all this. Well, first and foremost, the first slide's around COVID, right? COVID challenges are likely to be with us for some time until we get our vaccination rates higher, until the globe is vaccinated, not just rich countries. We must expect that there will be subsequent waves. And with that, we must expect that there'll be some versions of extra social distancing restrictions at times. The economic data in South Africa for sure is improving, right? But South Africa's inequalities started very large. And what's happened through the job market through this period has made them even larger still. And the global backdrop, as interest rates globally rise, not just here in South Africa, is not going to make our recovery and the closing of that inequality gap any earlier or easier. Now, given our challenges around inequality and jobs, the pressure, right, for economic and social change is going to become even larger. The number of disparate voices, everyone agreeing that we can't keep doing the things that we've been doing as a country, but very little agreement as to which direction we should be pushing policy. I think that's going to be with us for some time. Lots of focus on this space around government. Government absolutely needs to set a clear set of rules, right? But we must recognize that that's probably about the limit of what government can contribute in this space. We've run out of money. So it's going to have to be led by the private sector. And for that private sector, it's about investment and about confidence. We need to be doing things better so that businesses can feel that the next 5 or 10 years, South Africa is the right place to put their bets, rather than sitting back and watching from the sidelines. Let me leave my formal comments there. I think we've got some Q&A next.
Thank you, Jeff, for that very, very insightful presentation. Indeed, we have a lot to both be grateful for, but at the same time, we also have a lot of other challenges that we need to overcome as a society. So we're taking some questions from our audience. And the first question coming from Jack Bloom. Jack Bloom is asking, what is the impact of waning vaccine efficacy and the need for booster shots?
So I suppose first, let me say I'm an economist rather than a health practitioner. So in that space, I want to caveat my comments very hard. It strikes me that vaccine hesitancy is probably our first and foremost problem in South Africa right now with regard to COVID. Until we're in a place where we have a much larger proportion of the population fully vaccinated, we must accept that waves of infection as they come through are likely to put more people into hospital. As the hospitals take strain, we're going to have to shut down different parts of activity, and that just makes the economic cycle all the more painful. Booster shots, for those who are vaccinated already, I suppose there'll be some directives around booster shots. We don't have a shortage of vaccines now like we did in May and June. So I'm less concerned about booster shots. I'm more concerned about getting us from where we are right now with about 30% of the adult population fully vaccinated to a number that is much, much higher. Right now, at our current vaccination rate of about 150,000 jabs a day, kudos to our healthcare workers. That's an awful lot of poking holes in people. 150,000 people a day means you're only getting to about 1 million people a week. In South Africa, our population is not far off 60 million. So we are not weeks away from being done. We are not months away from being done. This goes well into 2023, well into 2022 before we're able to get our vaccination rate high enough.
And that indeed, of course, will continue to have a negative impact on the economy. Absolutely. So with the budget speech coming up, can we expect to hear anything hopeful from that, in your view?
Yeah, we were joking just before we came on about sort of the jobs you don't want in South Africa. I'd highlighted probably being the head of ESCOM is not a very fun job, right? Though maybe the lights go out in your house last, I don't know. But being finance minister, what a difficult environment, right? Because the needs of South Africans have ratcheted higher. We know that jobs have disappeared, right? We know that economic opportunity is tighter. We know that young people every year, we graduate either from matric or from different parts of post-secondary education into an environment where there's nothing to absorb them. At the same time, notwithstanding some extra revenues we've had from the mining sector because we got a bit lucky, we know that the money's just not there, right? And so very, very difficult balancing act. What do we know for sure? Hard to say. Some version of tax is probably going higher, but the balancing act, where we put the rands that we have to use, is probably a very difficult discussion within the ministry. I have no doubt it's a difficult discussion in cabinet. And for us in broader South African society, it's not obvious the way forward, but we've come sort of to the end of our rope here.
So with that said, in the graph that you put out, there was an indication of the political as well as the business confidence, right? Post the local elections that we've just recently had, do you see that changing in any way or having any sort of positive impact?
So what do we learn from the local elections? Again, a little bit like my caveat earlier that I'm not a health practitioner, so on vaccinations, I'm not a political analyst, but it strikes me that the most interesting things, not just from this local election, but from the last number of elections in South Africa, is waning voter turnout, right? That disenfranchisement, which is particularly acute in a country like South Africa, where the history of the vote is quite a vibrant and a hard-fought history. That is telling us that there are more people who believe that they just, it's not that they're not served by the ruling party. They don't feel that they're served by any of the major opposition parties. We had more than 300 parties contest these most recent local elections. And voter turnout, I haven't seen the final figures, but voter turnout looks to have only been about half of registered voters. And of course, not even all adults registered to vote. So that's the challenge I think we have in that space. In an environment where people don't feel that their voice can be heard, that they're not represented, that's an environment where there must be more social protest. Doesn't necessarily mean a return to the civil unrest that we saw in July, but more social protest, more frustration, more calls, not for nudges in one direction or another for the economy, but calls for really radical change. And that's an environment, frankly, that makes it more difficult for businesses and others to work forward, right? Gets back to the confidence component.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's Faisal Mkhize has touched on it because he was asking, what do you make of the low voter turnout on local government elections? But you've covered that. So we'll move on to Benji Porter's question. How significant was the commodities super cycle on the COVID recovery being better than expected?
So we got, in some ways, very lucky until perhaps quite recently in South Africa. During COVID, the price of gold went up very high, the price of platinum very high, notwithstanding the need to decarbonize the global economy. Price of coal has been very robust. And those are all things that South Africa produces. So that's been very helpful in that space. And we see it, you know, the mining sector in South Africa, when it comes to its profits, is very much boom bust, right? Prices rise, can't move for all the money. Prices fall, the whole thing looks like a disaster. As a country, it helps us, provides more money, if nothing else, for the fiscus. As mining companies are more profitable, they pay in more taxes. It provides the minister next week with a little bit more wiggle room in terms of providing social support and other supports for the economy. But this can't be the only answer for us, because we know that commodity cycles go up and then they go down. And what you must avoid is in the up cycle, imagining that this is going to last, and then making commitments to spend that money, not for the next year or two, but for the next 5 or 10. And so helpful, unlikely to be permanent, makes for a different set, but still tricky set of balances, checks and balances.
It's amazing that, you know, when you are having a good conversation, time flies. And for us, time has flown by. So thank you very much, Jeff, for sharing with us and giving us all of these insights. I am certain that, you know, all of the people watching have gained some very good insights to apply into their businesses and into their areas where they are focusing. So thank you very much.
Nimsa, thank you. And thanks to all the nominees and eventual winners. What an exciting thing, the Jewish Achiever Awards each year. Thank you.
Thanks. And this brings us perfectly to our next guest. So our next guest, you know, is an author of a couple of books, one of them being Third World Child, KasiNomic Revolution. I really love the naming convention of these books. So KasiNomic specializes in insights, strategies, routes to market and consumer marketing for informal Kasi Township consumer and business sectors. And you would have noted that in the previous conversations that we've had to this point, it has been about how we grow entrepreneurs. And I believe that having a conversation around how to grow Kasi economy is very, very critical. And the person to take us through that and have that conversation with us is none other than Mr. GG Alcock. Over to you, GG.
Thank you, Namsa. So in the shadows of the space we're in, of Absa and the center of Sandton, the financial center, there's a kind of invisible army. There's another economy that Jeff didn't speak about, which is one which should really inspire hope and belief. And this economy is an informal economy, and it is made up of a multitude of small businesses. I wrote in my book, KasiNomic Revolution, about the fact that the informal economy is the next great frontier of Africa, and it's a world of small people doing big things, transforming the continent and transforming our economies. And while there's doom and gloom around, COVID has actually shown, or despite COVID, is this amazing resilience of some of these businesses in this space. And I just want to talk about some of them, and they reflect in many ways the same kind of ethos of the achievers that we're talking about in the businesses in terms of the Jewish Achiever Awards. So on the slide here, if you take the Gautrain from Sandton here and you go right to the end of it, you arrive in Park Station, and you walk through Park Station, which has had a 400 million rand makeover, and you enter into Lagos, what feels like Lagos. And downtown Johannesburg is this frenetic activity. And in these spaces, there's a multitude of informal traders. And the one on the screen there, I call it Gogo Delicious, who is making amakwenya or vetkoek, the croissant of the informal economy or the township. Gogo Delicious sells 3,000 vetkoek every single day for 1 rand each. She also sells about 500 rands worth of polony, cheese slices, tea and coffee. She makes about 3,500 rand. She's been a day. She's been doing this for 10 years. She wakes up at 2 in the morning in Soweto. Her and her husband carry these 20-liter drums of their dough that they've prepared the night before. They grab a taxi, and by 3 in the morning, they're on the streets of Johannesburg and they're selling their amakwenya. And they represent this amazing kind of fast food sector that exists, that is about a 50 billion rand a year, 150,000 traders in this fast food sector. And I was chatting to her a while ago, and I said, talking about unemployment figures, are you do you have a job? Do you consider this employment? She said, "Ngiyasebenza anginamsebenzi," which in Zulu means I work, I do not have a job. And this really typifies this. She's a worker and she's an entrepreneur, and she doesn't see it as a job. And she's building this 2-story house in Soweto. And these are the people who drive our economy. On the right-hand side of the picture is a young lady who's 25 years old, who came from Limpopo to Johannesburg. She couldn't get a job. And so she decided, literally across the road from Gogo Delicious, she decided to start her little vetkoek business. And she's been going for about 3 years. And she sells 6,000 Vetkoek or amagwinya every single day and almost 1,000 rands worth of tea and coffee. And she employs 4 people, her brother and 3 others. And again, another typification, the opposite extremes, the gogo and the young lady building these amazing businesses. Over here we have in the bottom and in the top left and the bottom, we have what's called ikota or ispatlo, depending which part of Gauteng you are. And this is the hamburger of the townships, a quarter loaf of bread with slap chips, a slice of polony. And I, in my business, introduced cheese slices and built a 2.5 billion rand a year business in cheese slices going on to quarters. But this is a massive other fast food or out-of-home sector. As you can see from these quarters, they're endorsed by the Heart Foundation. They are Banting friendly. But on a serious note, the young lady, Tello, with the FBI cap there, Tello was a successful graduate of university. She was running a successful business in Pretoria in the CBD, and she recognized the opportunity for township fast food in the center of Pretoria, and she started what she calls Spatlo Palace. As I mentioned, it's the kind of quarter, the name for a quarter. And Tello, who's in her early 30s, has now got 6 Spatlo Palaces. She sells almost 4,000 quarters a day from each one of her outlets. And she has a thriving business in the center of Pretoria and in Braamfontein, Johannesburg. And she has this fleet of youngsters with electric scooters who shoot through the streets, delivering quarters to the High Court, which is right next to her, to businesses, to government departments, and has really built this amazing. In fact, if you go into the Spatlo Palace, it feels like you've gone into a subway. She's taken this township kind of quarter loaf of bread and slap chips, and you walk in and it's this highly efficient business with a food type that is adapted to the space. And Tello the other day bought herself a very high-end Range Rover. And when you buy a quarter, you buy it with the basics, which is slap chips and polony and the quarter, the bread. And then for 2 rand, you add an egg, 2.50 rand, a Russian, and so on. She said to me, "No, Gigi, when I bought this Range Rover, it was like a quarter. I said, just add this and then add that and add a different, bigger sunroof, and the seats must do this and that and whatever." And she's this inspirational person who represents this kind of invisible thing, and there she is in the space. On the left-hand side, that grand quarter, there's a youngster called Rulani, who is in Protea in Soweto, and he decided to start a range of quarter businesses, initially from a little caravan outside his little 4-room house or home, his family's home, and has since built this range of franchises. And this is in the middle of COVID. Rulani said to me, "COVID, don't worry about COVID. People will always still want a quarter." And he's, of course, you can see on the left-hand side, he's now launched this range of quarter franchises. And again, an inspiration at a time when we see that business confidence going down on the previous graph. And here we have these young entrepreneurs in spaces that in many cases people don't go, who have the complete confidence and belief in these spaces. And I think this is the entrepreneurial values that in fact inspire a lot of the kind of stuff we're talking about today. This is another youngster, Kopano, who contacted me and asked me if he would mentor me. And in his email, he said, I'm selling chicken and potatoes and takeaway packaging to 31 fast food outlets, quarter outlets, and what's called chicken dust outlets in Soweto. He said, I'm utilizing my late grandfather's Nissan 1400 bakkie, and I'm storing all my stuff in my grandmother's back room in Soweto. Most homes in Soweto have these little back rooms, and in this tiny back room, he stores all of this stuff. Anyway, I got involved with him, connected him with some business people who could supply him with chicken. And when he met me in mid-2019, he was turning over about 25,000 Rand a month, selling to 31 outlets. Today, he sells to 81 outlets, only 81 outlets, and he turns over 980,000 Rand a month. And this is another example of this economy that we don't recognize. As I mentioned, there's a 90 billion rand fast food sector in this space, but also of the people who are servicing these space, who are recognizing the opportunities and making the best of these opportunities in this space. And Gopano represents, Gopano had a job in the corporate sector, very well-paying job, and he left that job to move into the space. I recently connected Gopano to some business people who said they'd try and help him grow his business. And he said, I'd really love them to help me, but I want to do this on my own. I'm going to build this thing. I want to build this massive business on my own and turn down these amazing opportunities. And I think that drive, that passion, that thing that I'm going to do it on my own typifies a spirit and a sense of hope and a sense of the future of what this country can represent outside of this formal economy and outside of those depressing figures. Another youngster is Refilwe. Refilwe came from a place in Soweto called White City. White City is one of the poorest and in many ways one of the more violent parts of Soweto. And Refilwe, again, had a nice job and he decided that he was going to leave this job. In fact, he started buying baking equipment while he was at his job. He got unsecured a personal loan and started using the loan to buy baking equipment and stacked it up in his family's back room in White City. Now, White City, the homes are actually tiny. They make four-room homes actually look like mansions. And so, I kind of said, where did you stack it? Under his bed, on top of a cupboard, wherever he could, he was stacking this baking equipment and these ovens and stuff like that. And then he launched his bakery in a container in the back of his family home, and started doing really well. He was selling about 500 loaves of bread a day from this container, and COVID arrived, and he was supplying businesses. He was supplying Kota outlets. Of course, all the Kota outlets were closed when the fast food sector was closed over the initial lockdown. So what did Refilwe do? He placed his business offering on Facebook, and he invited people to send him a WhatsApp location. And of course, this has become the big thing. People saying, Tumeli pin, it's not about location. You live in the location, you send me ipin, and that's where you are. And so Refilwe then told people to send them ipin and their order, and he had these guys in the image there with these trolleys who walked the streets, sometimes 15 kilometers a day in the middle of lockdown, delivering cakes and rolls and bread in the streets. And he grew his business over that time. Today, he has 3 containers in various parts of Soweto and does 2,000 loaves of bread every single day. And I was chatting to him the other day, and he said, just watch me, Gigi. I'm going to be on 10,000 loaves of bread by February. And his biggest problem, of course, is actually getting space to put his bakeries and running them from this thing. But again, another great story. In the face of COVID, in the face of lockdowns, he went from 500 loaves of bread that he was selling and having demand for more to literally, he said, he was selling 50 to 80 loaves of bread just to the people around him. And then he said, no, I'm actually going to make this different, and started his Facebook, WhatsApp, and delivery business. This is the spaza sector, another huge sector. This is in Khayelitsha. I love this picture of this place in Khayelitsha. In fact, in Site C, which is one of the poorest, lowest income areas in Khayelitsha in the Western Cape, and the spaza sector is typified, and the reason there's not a face here, it's in many ways a more invisible space than the invisible spaces. And this is that it is led primarily by Somali traders who have braved incredible journeys, which I've written about, 6 months, 9 months, traveling from Somalia, fleeing the horror of Black Hawk Down and whatever's happened in Somalia, moving to South Africa, East Africa, Kenya, and setting up, and they have set up these huge retail. They're incredibly successful retailers. And again, in my book, I actually compared the Somali retailers with the Jewish merchant class that emerged in Europe in the 1800s, late 1800s and early 1900s, who spread throughout Europe, supplying very much what the Somali trader is doing in this kind of space. And these traders have, in essence, brought retail products, branded grocery items, closer to South African consumers. In fact, the spaza sector is growing incredibly fast, what I call spazarettes, more formal supermarket type spazas, saving people. What is the primary issue people have today is the risk of taking public transport to a shopping center, to a formal retailer, and more importantly, the cost of transport. Ignore the fact that when you come back from the retailer, you don't load the stuff in the boot and drive home. You carry the 12 kgs of flour here, you've got the Checkers bag tearing in your hand, you've got a 5-liter cooking oil and so on. And this, these guys have transformed the township retail space by providing food and products closer to people in walking distance. Give credit to the gokos and the moms on food items in that last week of the month when things are tough. And they have, in essence, helped drive 150 billion rand a year FMCG retail sector in the space. And you can imagine, I mean, imagine these, if you want to talk about resilience and you want to talk about belief and you want to talk about entrepreneurial zest, these guys have come all the way from Somalia. They don't speak the local language. They're considered in many ways foreigners. And here they are in the streets. They're generally called, oh, my friend. And they've learned the languages. Most of the Somalis and the Ethiopians, they speak Xhosa, Sotho, Tswana. They understand what are the products there. They give credit on items and giving the formal retailers a real run for their money in terms of being competitive in that space. So kind of in ending, there's a multitude of these entrepreneurs out there who typify this entrepreneurial zeal, who about hope, about belief in our economy. They continue to be invested. They have no choice in this space. They get no support from the government. They get no support from most financial institutions, and yet every day they're out there, and we're talking about billions and billions in the sector. And be there anyone from the lady in the top left, she sells snacks at a school in Tembisa, and I was chatting to her, and I said, how long have you been selling here? And she said, I've been selling here for 26 years. I was like, yo, sitting on that upturned bucket and plank, you've been here for 26 years. She said, I put 2 children through university while I've been sitting here, and my husband has been unemployed the whole time. And there she is, beaming and smiling to the camera, positive. She earns 6,500 odd rand a month profit from her little table there. She works for 3 hours a day, first break, second break, and after school. She put 2 children through university, and she continues to smile. Her quality of life is wonderful. The kids love her. They all know her. And we've also got to change this perception about misery and unhappiness, because most of these entrepreneurs are incredibly proud, and we should give them the dignity and respect of that. Whether they're that lady or the panel beater painting his sign on the wall, I really hope his panel beating and spray painting is better than the sign that he painted on the wall. Or the youngster, the funky youngster there who sells at the streetlights. He stands at the streetlights selling a product called Mayo, a remarkable frozen yogurt product that's known in the townships, but outside of that, generally not known. And he stands in the street corner, he whistles, he shouts, he walks up to people, he engages with people. He's got this funky attitude. And I said to him, if you got a job, would you take the job? He's like, yo, I love my customers, I love the space. And again represents something that is quite phenomenal. Or lastly, the guy in the what I call Victoria's Secret, almost like a finger up to the rest of the world. This little Dunusa, it's called a Dunusa salon, called Dunusa Salon because Dunusa means a bare bum. And the reason they call them Dunusa salons is when you wash your hair in a Dunusa salon, you've got your head down and your bum is bare in the street. Anyway, this Dunusa salon is also selling the bras there hanging in the street, and hence I call her Victoria's Secret. So the conclusion for me is that there's real hope. There's real there's a multitude of these entrepreneurs. Johnny Clegg had a song, Funum Sebenzi, we want work for all, and he spoke about an invisible army in the streets. And this invisible army surrounds us all around us. It's not just in the townships, it's not just in the rural areas, it's in the inner cities, it's in right here next to the Absa building. There's a little caravan on the corner selling what they call amapleti or amagoda and so on. And we need to recognize these guys. And if they have hope, and if they believe there's a future, and they're investing into this future, primarily because they don't have any other choices, but if they are doing it, so should we. And so should we give them the respect and the admiration for what they do. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, GG. That was, wow, truly, truly inspirational. Just listening to all of these stories, and it's stories that I can relate to, being from the township. But at the same time, I realized to what extent I actually never thought about what it means for the people and how much, you know, it means for them and the economy. And on that note, how can we help and support the sector to contribute more to the economy? In your view, how do we do that?
So I think that you talk about, you don't notice that when I wrote about Gogo Delicious, she wanted to know, why do you want to write about me? I said, because you're an amazing business person. And she said, me, a business person? I was like, yes. And anyway, I said to her, when I write my book, I'm going to bring you a copy. And in my book, in KasiNomic Revolution, I have a picture of her. And I went downtown, and there was her husband and I gave her this copy of the book, and I opened it up, and there was the picture of her. And she was incredibly moved. She said, you really wrote about me. You really thought my business was so important. And I mean, just a funny aside, while we were standing there, one of the people selling next to her walked over and said to her husband, hey, you guys have got lots of good muti. And she said, and the husband said, why? He said, you know, we've seen this white man. He walks up and down here looking and chatting to people. And he walks past all of us, but he stops with you. You've got strong muti that attracts these people. But I guess the point of the story is that I think that the real opportunity is that, first of all, we should be recognizing those people, whether we're a municipality, whether we're a financial institution, whether we're a government department, whether we're a supplier of flour, for argument's sake, to the Fedcooks. We should be recognizing these sectors and these business people for what they are. And I often talk about small is the new big. You know, if you look at the gig economy, Uber and whatever, small is genuinely the new big, a multitude of small businesses that constitute a larger economy. And first of all, by recognizing them, we start then creating products, bylaws, offerings that can actually help grow these businesses. These are businesses that could grow very easily if they had all sorts of kind of support. And so that for me is the real starting point. Let's recognize them. Let's give them the credit they deserve. And once we do that, we start saying, how do we actually bring them into the economy or grow them, whichever might be more valid.
Almost like trying to make sure that they're part of the formal economy's infrastructure.
Absolutely.
And I believe there's a lot of work to be done in order to make sure that that is done, because I don't think Gogo has a proper spreadsheet in accounting, etc.
But for 10 years, she's made money.
Absolutely. And that so from your engagements and everything that you've seen to this point, what would you say is that key ingredient, that thing that makes these businesses survive even in the midst of COVID?
So, you know, I guess that one of the big things is that these are businesses that have very low overheads. Most of the time they operate from a residential premises. It's a container in front of the house or a back room at the back of the house. So they've got very low overheads. But more importantly, they're generally neighborhood businesses. They have a customer circle that is neighbors, friends, whatever it might be. And so when COVID happened, as an example, you could still buy your vegetables by walking down to the hawker on the street corner. People in the formal economy, like my wife, they couldn't go to the hair salon. Soshanguve, you could walk down the road to Busi, and Busi did it in her back room, and so on and so forth. But the funny part, I do say, is that the lockdowns forced all of the high income and formal people to recognize the informal economy and to take part in it, because they needed cigarettes and they needed alcohol and they needed their hair done and so on and so forth. But I think to a large extent, these are businesses that are incredibly resilient. They have been able to withstand all of these impacts. And that just points to the fact that they're not just survivalist businesses. And again, the ability to survive. I mean, look at Refilwe going from 500 loaves of bread to 2,000 loaves of bread. Is this even further? Just points to the hope and the opportunities and the reasons we need to believe in these in our economy.
And the resilience in the people.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So I've got a question from Kara Saven asking, are any of these stories being showcased to school kids? These needs to be their role models, hardworking, informal sector entrepreneurs.
Yeah, so I personally try, and one of the reasons I wrote KasiNomic Revolution, actually, because KasiNomics was the first time people heard about this. And then when I wrote KasiNomic Revolution, in fact, at the end, I talk about the different sectors of our economy, and primarily I talk about the youth and about the fact that they need to look at what is a business differently. And I talk to township entrepreneurs and township youth, and I say, look in the mirror, don't look out the window, because the opportunities exist within your rear view mirror, in essence, around you. So the answer is directly that I don't think enough is done. I would hope, and I try in my way to do this. My local schools where my kids go, I talk to the kids there. A few of them, I hope, will start Water King enterprises. But our economy is changing in both the formal economy as well as in the informal economy. And as these economies have changed, and they were changing before COVID, there's going to be different jobs that are out there. And I think these are the lessons that should be told. And by doing them, we create inspirational characters, because when we look at that lady, we don't think an entrepreneur is Bill Gates and Elon Musk, which is an unachievable, like 1 in a billion people become like that. But many more can become these people. And I think there's a real need for us to change the mindset, that thing about, I work, I don't have a job. We need to change that in our youth. And in doing so, kind of make them think differently about where the opportunities are.
Thank you very much, Gigi. That was extremely inspirational. And I've enjoyed the presentation. I've enjoyed the conversation thoroughly. That was extremely motivational. Thank you very much. You've given me quite a lot to also just think about in terms of recognizing what these people do. And the next time I walk past Gogo, I will remember that this is a business, a real business with a real turnover. Thank you very much, Gigi.
Thank you.
So on that hopeful note, I'm certain that after listening to all of that, you realize that there is just so much for us to be hopeful about as a people, as a nation. These are informal. We've just seen how informal economy continue to thrive in the midst of very harsh and difficult conditions. So the theme of hope that we have chosen for this year is so befitting, because there's lots of opportunities for us to explore. And indeed, there's lots for us to be hopeful about. To the nominees, good luck for Sunday. I know that it's going to be a wonderful ceremony. So good luck for that. And from me, thank you very much for having spent this time and allowing me to grace you and be in your presence this morning. And we're going to sign out with a beautiful video that also demonstrates hope. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Wow, Peter. I mean, I know I've seen it before, but I mean, it's still so inspirational.
I know I wasn't planning to watch every last minute of it, I have to be honest, but I was glued. So I must say, yeah, it does give me hope. Give me hope.
Absolutely. And that is what our theme was for the Jewish Achievers this year. It was hope. And it is hope, because where we were 2 years ago was a very different place to where we are now and where we find ourselves. And we've moved along. So we've moved again, as we said, from the story that was COVID to the story that is the vaccine, to moving past it to where there is hope, where there's growth, where there's regeneration, where people are getting back their jobs, and where we look there at entrepreneurs and people who have really looked at their situations and said, how can I change and how can I make make sort of the most of this opportunity? As Churchill said, never waste a good crisis. And I think that's what always amazes me is, and I don't know if it's only our community, but when I look at our community, how people use what they've got to help themselves, help the community, and help others, which, it fascinates me that people don't just think about me. They think about us. Yeah. And also what we've also, I think, which we've had the opportunity to do is showcase not just the businesses that have succeeded, but specifically over our webinars and really from the beginning of lockdown, shown the organizations like Africa Tikkun, like Glenn Wallman of the Angel Network, who won our humanitarian award, all those people who have given so much back to society. I mean, they are like innumerable, actually, the amount of people in our community that have made a massive, massive difference to society, given back in South Africa, around the world, actually, and really made a difference in people's lives. And I think that's what the balance is. And that's what we actually, our community got right.
Yeah. And gives us hope.
Absolutely. So with that, I think we have to officially sign off. We have to say thank you to everyone. If you've got comments, please feel free to put them in the chat. We're going to have it on for few more minutes. And again, everyone, wishing you only the best over the sort of festive season, the holidays. May you all have a great holiday, maybe a good deserved break. Be safe, and hopefully come back next year refreshed, re-energized, and ready for a great year, and hopefully a year where we'll have less restrictions and more opportunities.
Absolutely. Amen to that.
Absolutely.
Have a beautiful holiday. Cheers, Dean.
Cheers.